Part 3. Cancel culture. As I observed earlier, Nick Fuentes may be the greatest victim of cancel culture in the history of the United States, perhaps for social media in general. So the question about this is, how do the French deal with the very notion of cancel culture? An example. Where I live in Bordeaux is about 15 minutes from the largest, or certainly claimed to be, largest open space, public open space in Europe, the Cacons, where our tram lines and our parking and where we have our exhibition sites for fun fairs and secondhand furniture fairs and what have you. And on this site, there are two enormous statues. One of them of Montaigne, the French Renaissance thinker, famous for inventing the essay as a literary form, and across from him is Montesquieu, the great liberal thinker of the Enlightenment. These are two of our greatest thinkers, and they are sons of the Aquitaine, the Bordeaux, and they are memorialized in this fashion. However, go around the corner, walk down a street, and turn back and look up, and there is a street sign. And on that street sign is written the name of a famous person. Now, France is full of these things. They have street after street dedicated to famous people from the past, and sometimes these are forgotten people. The person in question is Joseph de Gobineau. And Joseph de Gobineau was a 19th century writer, thinker, and I've asked a couple of my Bordelais friends, they know the street, but they don't know who he is. Who was he? He was the author of perhaps the most famous text the 19th century produced on scientific racism. His influence was immense at the time. His reputation is in tatters as a consequence of the events of the 20th century, most particularly the Holocaust. And therefore, the idea that there is a sign with his name on it in liberal Bordeaux, in the very heart of the city, takes some explaining. The contrasting, and also interestingly French vignette on all of this, is that Montesquieu's, one of his most famous books was The Spirit of the Laws, and there is a street not very far from Gobineau's sign, which has the name, The Spirit of the Law, in French, as a street name. Now, to have your streets of your cities bedecked with the names of famous people is one thing. To have a major street in a great city with the name of a text, of a classic text, this doesn't happen everywhere. But in France it happens. Now, as I said, Montesquieu is a liberal hero, and the Spirit of the Laws is an expression of the things we admire about him. But what on earth is this sign of Gobineau doing there? When I first saw it, I was struck dumb. I knew who Gobineau was, and the idea that there would be a street sign in this place of all places, not conservative France, is simply remarkable. And this led to this rather interesting dialogue, implicit and not actual, between Nick Fuentes and the President of France. Asked about cancel culture, the President of France, Macron, observed that France had a troubled past and needed to deal with it. But in his heart of hearts, he could not accept the notion of canceling the past in this way. Nick Fuentes, coming from a cancel culture-ridden culture, will find this interesting. But the more interesting idea of all is that ideas like Gobineau's, which now Fuentes has brought to life, the notion of race and what it means and what it does not mean, what place it has in our civic discourse or not. This can only be done when you begin to wrestle with the ideas themselves and the thinkers who thought them and in their context. Now, Gobineau is particularly interesting like this. His racist reputation is unquestioned. You bring up Wikipedia, what have you, there it is. However, things get more interesting. For example, I've just in the previous essay talked about Ernst Renan. And Ernst Renan conducted a very interesting conversation about race in his correspondence with Gobineau. Now, left-wing thinkers go very upset with this and attacked Renan for having this relationship, this intellectual connection with Gobineau, because Gobineau is racist and Renan is not a racist, but he's very mindful of the impact of language on culture and cultural groups, including groups that he describes as racist, although as races, for example, the Celts, in a way that doesn't quite apply to the way that Gobineau talks about it, but there it is. Far more interesting for Americans is the fact that Gobineau was best friends with de Tocqueville. Alex de Tocqueville is another liberal hero who knew the States well, probably has written the most important book on America by a foreigner, in which he famously observed that the core political difficulty of the United States, then as now, is race, which raises the interesting question of where Tocqueville's ideas of race came from before he went to the States and then observed American life through the lens of an idea of race. And things become richer and more complete and more frustratingly complex if the implication is that Gobineau gave Tocqueville that lens. So you see, this inventory of ideas comes to play. You keep your tendency, your urge to cancel under control, under the indirect or direct suspicion that someday your culture, your people, your nation, your civilization may need that idea to be clear about itself. And that's why Gobineau's name is still on that sign in my mind. Someday we may need Gobineau to be clearer about how we feel or think about things, politically and otherwise. Gobineau's idea is race, and all of a sudden race is so clearly important in the American context. For example, and we'll conclude here, Dick Fuentes famously observed, when asked if he was a white nationalist, he said, "No, I'm a nationalist who is white. White nationalists want America to be white and white only, and I don't see that as a realistic prospect." I'm paraphrasing here. So this notion of whiteness as a racial designation becomes instantly more complex. And the question that follows from that is, does Gobineau allow us to deal with this complexity in an enlightened, socially soothing, revealing way? And that's the French approach to cancel culture, which by and large the Anglo-Saxon and America, the Anglosphere, has failed to come to grips with, but the French are more at home with. Under pressure, but at home with. And that's another reason why, by indirection, going back to my Canadian schoolboy, looking at a French text, Gobineau, for example, can all of a sudden find that his world is expanded, illuminated, and comprehended in a way that might not otherwise be true, just at the moment when Canada needs to be clear about what it is, what its place in the world is, and how it thinks about its political culture. End of lesson 3.